The Appalachian night seemed endless, a silence so deep that even the crack of a twig could echo like a gunshot across the ridges. In West Virginia, scouts moved carefully through the mist, their lanterns throwing faint halos of light against the blackness. They were trained to fear ambush, to look for hidden rifles in the trees, to listen for the shuffle of boots in undergrowth. Yet on this night, what they feared was not an enemy of flesh and blood. What they described was something far stranger, something that moved not with footsteps, but with the heavy pulse of wings. At first it was only sound, a thrum above the tree line, slow, deliberate, like canvas beating against the wind. The men froze, rifles lifted, eyes scanning the canopy. Lantern light trembled in their hands. Then out of the haze they saw them. Eyes, red, unblinking, suspended in the air like coals torn from a fire. They watched, and they did not blink. Some said the eyes hovered. Others swore they belonged to a figure vast and shadowed its outline, blurred against the moonlight wings, stretching across the mist as if blotting out the stars. Reports written later spoke in cold phrases, a singular apparition, fate unknown, strange visitation. The language of military dispatches tried to strip away fear, but between the lines, the dread is clear. One account was left unfinished, as though the hand that wrote it trembled too much to continue. A half-burned photograph tucked into the corner of an old file showed nothing but a smear of motion on the ridge, yet someone had scrawled in ink. It was watching. The men returned, but they did not speak of it loudly. Some whispered only once, then never again. Others drank heavily, trying to bury the memory. A few disappeared altogether, their names marked as deserters or fate unrecorded. For decades, these fragments lay buried in drawers in archives no one wished to disturb. Still, the stories seeped out through letters, through newspaper clippings, through campfire talk carried by locals. The same words repeat across time: mysterious occurrence, strange shadow, eyes that burned in the night. It begins here in the heart of West Virginia's wilderness, where scouts with rifles and lanterns believed they were hunting enemies, but instead became prey to something far older, far stranger than war itself. They gave it many names. None lasted, except one. The name that clung like a warning whispered through generations: the Mothman. West Virginia, mid-20th century. A land caught between silence and memory. The Appalachian Mountains stretched endlessly dense forests, draped over ridges, valleys, carved deep like scars, mist rising and clinging like a veil that never lifted. By day, sunlight fell hard upon black coal mines and winding rivers that curled around small, weary towns. By night, the land shifted into something else entirely, thick, suffocating stillness broken only by the drone of insects, the call of an owl far away, and sometimes by sounds no one dared to name. Those who lived here were hardened by the land. Miners who clawed coal from the dark, farmers who worked poor soil, families who depended on forest and stream to survive. Yet along with this endurance came a quiet conviction that the mountains were not only stone and trees. They were alive. They were watching. They held secrets that no man should ever try to uncover. That is why every story carried a warning. Do not wander past the ridge after sundown. Do not cross the river if you hear wings above. Do not stare too long into the tree line, because the red eyes might be staring back. Children grew up with such words not as fairy tales, but as lessons of survival. And those words, whispered in cabins and churches, in mining camps and schoolyards, soon found their way into the ears of young scouts sent to patrol the ridges. On paper, their duty seemed simple: trace the ridge lines, mark the maps, guard the territory. But reality was far different. When lantern light flickered in the fog, when trails vanished under damp leaves, the men felt themselves swallowed by the wilderness. Their bootsteps thudded heavy on wet earth, yet even that rhythm was devoured by silence. A single sound, a branch snapping, a gust of wind tearing through a hollow, suddenly carried the weight of an omen. In county archives, on yellowing sheets of newsprint, fragments remain. Mysterious occurrence unsettles the camp. A watchman struck by singular dread. The fate of 2 men unknown. These short clipped notes appear beside church announcements and mine accidents. Small, almost invisible, yet repeated like echoes carved into the mountains themselves. So when the scouts set foot on those ridges, they carried 2 worlds within them. One was military maps, orders, rigid discipline. The other was older folklore, superstition, the warnings of locals, the shadows unnamed. They could not know they were stepping into a threshold between history and legend, a liminal space where every sound might belong to an enemy, or to something that had haunted these ridges long before any war was fought. In this landscape, the Appalachians became a stage. The fog was the curtain. The night was the backdrop. The soldier lantern, trembling in his hand, was only a small figure, while somewhere above, lost in shadow, a pair of red eyes opened. The official record begins in fragments, lines, scattered across dusty ledgers, penciled into logbooks, printed on brittle paper that now crumbles at the edges. Each piece alone feels insignificant, but when gathered together, they form the outline of something larger. A presence that stalked the ridges of West Virginia and unsettled even the most disciplined of men. One of the earliest notes comes from a scout detachment dated July 1945. The report is terse, written in the impersonal tone of military language. 2 men failed to return from patrol. Lantern found, extinguished. Equipment present, no struggle evident. Fate unknown. That last phrase, fate unknown, would appear again and again in the months that followed, echoing like a refrain. In September of that same year, another entry in the watch log describes lights over the ridge. Irregular, not lantern, not flare. The report concludes simply, source undetermined. There is no explanation, no follow-up, only the silence of bureaucratic ink closing the page. Yet tucked in the margin in handwriting, nearly invisible, someone has scribbled, "It circled us." By October, the language begins to strain under the weight of unease. A sergeant writing during a midnight watch noted experienced singular dread. No enemy sighted. Report filed under unusual occurrence. Singular dread, an old-fashioned phrase, clipped and cold, yet its meaning is unmistakable. A seasoned man hardened by training and isolation, admitting to a fear he could not name. Another document filed weeks later was nearly lost to mildew and water damage. What remains legible reads, "Heard wings, heavier than bird, movement above hollow, red gleam in dark, cannot explain." The sentence ends abruptly, the ink dragging across the paper as though the hand that wrote it faltered. No signature follows. The page remains anonymous. In Point Pleasant, a local newspaper printed a curious piece in November 1946. It was buried between a church schedule and an advertisement for coal stoves, yet it remains one of the few public records. Mysterious occurrence unsettles camp along the valley. Witnesses describe shadow across tree line. Officials declined to comment. The editor clearly chose caution, but the phrasing "mysterious occurrence" caught the eye of locals, who began whispering of red eyes watching from the hills. There are photographs, too, though they reveal little. Grainy black and white images of scouts on patrol, fog rolling behind them. One photo, badly burned along the edges, shows little more than blurred treetops. But when examined closely, 2 faint orbs of light appear in the haze, positioned too high to be lanterns, too fixed to be stars. On the reverse side, scrawled in hurried script, "It followed us." No date, no name. Other records were deliberately closed. Pages cut out. Sentences ending in mid-thought. One file bears the stark annotation, "Report incomplete, classification suspended." It is as if those who witnessed the presence attempted to write down their fear, only to be silenced by something larger. whether through censorship or through dread itself. And yet the same words repeat across logbooks, newspapers, and marginal notes. Strange occurrence, singular dread, fate unknown. The language is restrained clinical, but behind it lies a fear that could not be contained in words. Scouts disappeared. Lanterns were found abandoned. Men returned shaken, unable or unwilling to speak. It is in these cold lines of ink, in the fragments of memory preserved on yellowing paper, that the first shadow of the Mothman takes form. Not yet named, not yet myth. Only a pattern of loss of fear of red eyes in the night. A pattern that refuses to vanish no matter how many times the files are closed. In the Appalachian hills, folklore is not entertainment, it is survival. The mountains are not merely geography. They are alive with stories, and those stories weigh heavily on every family that has lived in their shadow. Long before the Scouts ever set foot in West Virginia's ridges, people here already spoke of a figure, something winged, something watching something that did not belong. Old men on porches recalled nights when the air itself seemed to shiver. They told of hunting dogs refusing to leave their kennels of cattle freezing in open fields, staring into the tree line as though hypnotized. Some whispered of lights, two glowing embers, that floated in the dark just beyond the edge of a lantern's glow. And though no one dared speak too boldly, the meaning was clear to meet those eyes was to invite misfortune. A diary from 1907, preserved in a family chest, carried this line: "Saw a shape at the ridge taller than any man. Wings closed at its sides, still as a tree. When my lantern touched it, the eyes burned red. I prayed. By morning, the bridge had collapsed into the river. No name was signed beneath it, but the page was marked with a trembling hand." Farmers added their own stories. In Mason County, one woman described a bird without sound that circled her fields at dusk. She swore the corn bent under its shadow, though no wind stirred. Weeks later, her son fell ill with fever, and the neighbors muttered that the shadow had chosen its victim. Another family found tracks in the mud near their barn, 3-toed deep, larger than a man's hand. The tracks led nowhere, vanishing at the edge of the woods. Hunters feared it most of all. A group of 3 in 1924 returned pale from an expedition, telling of a rush of air that passed over their heads as though wings had brushed the treetops. One man, shaking, insisted it weren't no bird. Those eyes fixed on us. We knew then we were marked. They abandoned the hunt and never entered that hollow again. From that day forward, locals called it Dead Man's Hollow, though no man had died there yet. Miners carried their legends underground. In the shafts where timber creaked and water dripped, men swore they heard something above them. Wings, vast and steady, circling unseen. One miner in 1932 said he felt dust falling from the ceiling moments before a cave-in crushed 3 of his comrades. He told the foreman, "The wings were warning us." Others believed differently, that the creature itself was the cause, a herald of collapse that thrived on death. Even children were not spared. In the late 1930s, 2 boys near Point Pleasant returned from the woods with strange feathers, thick black, oily to the touch. Their mother burned them, immediately weeping as she did, warning, "You never bring the watcher's mark into this house." For years afterward, the boys swore they saw red glints outside their window at night lingering in the trees. Folklore spread into sermons. A preacher in 1941 warned his congregation, "The devil walks with wings in these mountains. His eyes are fire, his message is ruin. When he looks upon a house, sorrow will follow." Some parishioners scoffed. Others crossed themselves and hurried home before nightfall lanterns held close to their chests. Across the decades, the pattern held red eyes before misfortune, wings before collapse, a shadow before death. Each family told it differently. Each valley gave it another name: the bird, the watcher, the harbinger. But when soldiers returned with reports of dread and eyes in the dark, the locals needed no convincing. To them this was no mystery. This was confirmation. The lore hardened into something darker in the late 1940s. As soldiers muttered about a presence following their patrols, townspeople whispered a new name. It was not the name of a bird, nor a ghost, nor a demon from the Bible. It was something in between. Something that belonged to the industrial age of lanterns and bridges, jamas and coal mines, yet still reeked of the old mountain spirits. They called it the Mothman. That name clung because it felt both fragile and terrible moth, a creature of night drawn to flame, man a shape too human to dismiss, too inhuman to embrace. From then on, the stories of feathers and shadows of miners' warnings and hunters' dread fused with the reports of scouts. Fact and folklore became inseparable. A legend had been born, not in a single moment, but in the long weaving of whispers, disasters, and eyes that refused to fade from memory. And even now, in faded interviews and handwritten notes, the refrain persists. Saw the eyes, heard the wings, fate unknown. The stories grew louder after the first files were quietly closed. What had been scattered fragments, reports of singular dread folklore, of wings in the dark, now began to align into a chain of incidents, each one stranger, each one harder to ignore. In the winter of 1947, a patrol along the Ohio River reported a noise unlike any they had known. Not the whistle of wind, not the beating of a bird's wings, but a steady thrumming, as if the night itself was alive. Lanterns flickered. One man dropped his map, staring upward, whispering, "It's watching us." The report filed afterward was brief, almost evasive. Unusual vibration, no visible cause, men unsettled. Yet in the margins, someone scribbled "eyes above the ridge." Weeks later, near Point Pleasant, a farmer and his wife described hearing a rush of air overhead. They swore they saw something descend into the trees, tall and broad-shouldered wings folding tight. Their cattle refused to graze for days afterward. The farmer's testimony never reached the newspapers, but a neighbor remembered the family burning their haystack, convinced it carried a curse. In March 1948, 2 scouts vanished while charting the backwoods near Mason County. Their rifles were found leaning against a tree, untouched, their boots still on the path. There was no sign of struggle, no tracks leading away. Just silence. The official line read, "Presumed deserters." Yet one officer wrote in his private notebook, "They did not desert. They were taken." Soon the folklore and the files began to feed each other. Townsfolk whispered of glowing eyes at the window of a schoolhouse late at night. A teacher swore she heard scratching on the roof, but when she raised her lamp, she saw only darkness. Children told stories of a winged shadow perched on the church steeple, its red eyes gleaming like embers. And in the hills, hunters abandoned their grounds, leaving behind traps still baited, claiming the shadow walks there now. By the early 1950s, strange patterns appeared in local archives. A bridge collapse near the Kanawha River was preceded by reports of luminous eyes sighted above the valley. A mine accident in Fayette County followed weeks of workers whispering about something in the shafts. Each disaster left behind not only debris and loss, but also a rumor that the Mothman had been seen days before, watching silently. The motif was undeniable. Red eyes before tragedy, wings in the dark before collapse. Files marked incomplete, reports filed then silenced. Locals began to see the creature not just as legend, but as omen. It was never merely a shadow, it was a warning. And yet, with every warning, no one could decide, was the creature the cause of disaster, or a messenger trying to foretell it? Was it a predator or a prophet? Men argued in taverns and churches. Some said it was the devil's work. Others a spirit of the mountain, bound to bear witness to human folly. A few half-drunk and bitter muttered, "It's waiting for us all." As the years passed, each retelling sharpened the legend. More voices joined the chorus. Files accumulated, then disappeared. Photographs blurred. Names lost. And the shadow over the Appalachians grew no longer an isolated sighting, but a presence woven into the fabric of West Virginia life appearing again and again at the edge of disaster. The stage was no longer local. The Mothman had stepped from whispered firesides into the collective imagination, part record, part superstition, part nightmare. And every new incident pulled the people of the valley deeper into its shadow, where fact and folklore could no longer be separated, only feared. The stories of West Virginia did not remain confined to one valley or a handful of yellowed reports. As researchers dug deeper into forgotten archives, they began to see a motif, an echo that reached beyond the Appalachians. What at first seemed like local superstition began to look like part of something larger, a pattern stitched across time and place, a thread connecting disasters, disappearances, and red-eyed watchers. In Kentucky across the river, miners told of a phantom bird seen circling pits before collapses. In the Carolinas, hunters whispered of a night crow whose wings could blot out the stars. Old newspapers from Pennsylvania speak of strange lights and an apparition resembling an owl, man-sized wings, expanded eyes burning. The language varies, but the essence remains: wings, eyes, dread disaster. The WPA Folklore Project of the 1930s preserved testimonies that sound eerily familiar. A farmer's wife in Tennessee, "I seen him before the flood. He was perched on the hill, red eyes looking down. When the river rose, I knew he had come to warn us." A fisherman along the Ohio River. "Something passed overhead. No sound, but the water rippled like under a storm. That night, a boat sank." These stories, scattered and unconnected, at first form the same unsettling pattern. Even farther back among native legends of the Ohio Valley, there are whispers of a winged watcher. The Shawnee spoke of Meshiwa, a spirit that appeared before great upheaval, eyes burning like fire wings, casting shadows across the land. For them, it was not evil, but inevitable, an omen of change. The Cherokee told of Uktena, a creature bound to the forests whose gaze could curse those who met it. Such stories lived long before the first soldiers patrolled these ridges, yet they flow seamlessly into the modern accounts. This bridge between past and present complicates the question: was the Mothman, a creature born in the 20th century, conjured from war nerves and cold town superstitions? Or was it the modern face of something that had always been here, lurking in folklore, long before it had a name? The very repetition of the motif wings, eyes, disaster suggests that this is not new. It is the same shadow reappearing, changing only the mask it wears. Scholars who examined the reports noted the parallels to Europe as well. In England, before the collapse of a mine in 1895, men swore they saw a giant winged figure on the ridge. In Germany, stories of the Nachtrabe, the night raven, warned of death before war. The Appalachian accounts fit into this older lineage, an unbroken chain of superstition stretching across continents. And so the bridge becomes clear: the Mothman of West Virginia was not alone. It was part of a chorus of winged omens, stretching from native prophecy to old-world folklore, from the Ohio River to the coal mines of Europe. Each story adds weight to the others. Each report reinforces the motif. Together, they weave a tapestry too consistent to ignore. What began as scattered voices now resounds as a single haunting refrain. The Watchers have always been here. They have always had red eyes. They have always come before disaster. The Scouts' reports were not anomalies, they were continuations. The folklore was not exaggeration, it was remembrance. And with every link uncovered, the mystery only deepens. Was the shadow predator prophet or punishment? The bridge between incidents suggests something older than men, older than war, older even than the ridges themselves. A presence bound not to time but to tragedy, waiting, watching, and reappearing whenever calamity draws near. By the mid-1950s, the shadow over the Appalachians was no longer a whisper. It had become a pattern so clear that even those who dismissed folklore could not ignore the evidence. Files thickened with unexplained incidents, each one echoing the same refrain: eyes, wings, disaster. The line between myth and record blurred, until it was almost impossible to separate what was fact from what was fear. The most chilling accounts came from scouts themselves, written in the margins of notebooks, tucked into letters home, hidden between official lines. One man described hearing a rushing of wings above the Ohio River, followed by silence so absolute it felt like the world had stopped. He wrote, "The eyes were upon us, burning in the fog. I swear they followed me even when I closed mine." His letter ended abruptly. Weeks later, his name appeared in a report, missing, presumed desertion, fate unknown. Another fragment recovered from a water-damaged file in Mason County tells of a patrol that returned shaken men, pale and silent. One scrawled note reads, "It descended over us. Lantern light dimmed, photograph blurred. Sergeant says no word." But it was there. The photograph survives smudged, scarred, but with two faint orbs glimmering in the haze. Some claim they are tricks of exposure. Others insist they are eyes. Then there were the collapses. A bridge along the Kanawha River, structurally sound, according to engineers, gave way without warning. Survivors swore they had seen something perched above the trusses the night before, wings, folded eyes glowing faintly like watchfires. A mining disaster in Fayette County was preceded by reports of strange dread among the workers' men who claimed they heard wings beating in the tunnels. In each case, the officials wrote nothing of omens. They filed the tragedies as mechanical failure, human error. But among the people, the pattern was already known. The folklore hardened into prophecy. Each new sighting was no longer a curiosity, but a warning. Families lit extra lamps at night. Children were told not to look out windows after dark. Miners prayed before entering shafts. Farmers nailed charms above their doors. And still the eyes came. Still the wings passed silently over ridges. Still the disasters followed. In the fall of 1957, a preacher in Point Pleasant gave a sermon that shook his congregation. He spoke of the angel of ruin that walks these hills, eyes of fire, wings of silence, bearing witness before the downfall. His words spread quickly, carried from church to tavern, from tavern to mine. By winter, the people had stopped calling it the bird or the watcher. The name was fixed now, etched in dread, the Mothman. The climax of the legend came not in one event, but in the growing certainty that something vast and inexplicable had made its home in the Appalachians. Every red-eyed sighting, every disappearance, every collapse layered into a narrative too heavy to dismiss. It was no longer enough to say singular occurrence or fate unknown. The men who survived swore it was real, that it stood on ridges, that it watched them in silence. And in the hush that followed each report, one question loomed. Was the Mothman the cause of these tragedies, or their herald? Did it bring the disasters, or did it warn of them? The ambiguity was worse than certainty. For certainty can be fought. Ambiguity only grows. By the late 1950s, the Mothman was no longer just a shadow. It was a presence, a myth that lived equally in the lines of official documents and the whispered warnings of Appalachia. Its red eyes haunted both fact and folklore. And as night fell over the valleys, as lanterns flickered, and scouts vanished into the fog, the fear remained the same. Somewhere above, wings moved through the dark. And something was watching. The Appalachians remain unchanged in their silence. The ridges still stand, the forests still breathe, the fog still drifts down into the valleys like a shroud. But for those who know the stories, the quiet is not peace, it is vigilance. Somewhere in that stillness, they believe the eyes still glow. Red, patient, watching. The records end with missing pages, with notes cut short, with photographs blurred and incomplete. The folklore continues, handed from father to son, from grandmother to child, from soldier to civilian. The words repeat: singular dread, fate unknown, mysterious occurrence. They belong as much to memory as to myth. They remind us that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, only endured. Even today, locals in Point Pleasant and the hollows of West Virginia speak in hushed tones of nights, when headlights catch a shadow too large to be a bird, too silent to be a plane. They speak of glowing eyes appearing in treetops, vanishing when approached. They speak of a feeling something heavy pressing against the chest, a certainty that one is not alone. The name has endured across generations, the Mothman. Is it an omen warning of disasters yet to come? Or is it a predator feeding on tragedy? Some claim it is neither, that it is simply a witness bound to the land appearing whenever history tips toward catastrophe. But perhaps the truth does not matter. Perhaps the power lies in the fear, in the silence that settles when someone asks, "Did you see the eyes?" The Appalachian folklore tells us one thing above all: shadows do not vanish. They wait. And in that waiting, they gather strength. The same shadow that haunted scouts in the 1940s, that stalked miners and farmers, may yet linger in the ridges tonight. And if the pattern holds, if the eyes return, then what follows may already be written. The mountains remember, the rivers remember, the people remember, and the shadow remains. You have just heard another file from Classified History. Some mysteries will never be fully explained, but they demand to be told. If you wish to follow us deeper into the archives, into the whispers, the records, and the folklore, subscribe and prepare yourself. For as long as men walk the ridges of Appalachia, the watcher in the dark may walk beside them.